The whole thing, everything was ready for Gibson. I handed it to Gibson, and Gibson says, thank you, but no thank you. And many years later, the president said, at the Mayo Clinic, he said to me, he says, Les, I got to tell you something. He says, for 10 years, we called you the character with the broomstick with the pickups on it. And he says, we laughed at you. And now he says, look how big it is today, how wrong we were. And I didn't think anything about it. I just knew there were 10 years to convince him. It might have taken 20 years. Didn't matter, I believed him.
Hi, welcome to Gibson USA. I'm Jim Decola, Master Luthier for Gibson USA, and we're here to give you a tour of our facility. Here we're at the rough mill, also known as the mill room. Here we process all the wood from rough materials to the carved out bodies and carved out necks before they go to the next plant. Here we cure the wood, we process it, rip the larger pieces into the smaller pieces that we make the body blanks from and the neck blanks, and then we have our kilns that will dry the wood to get it equilibrated to the proper moisture content. Here we have mahogany lumber that we got in from the vendor. It hasn't been dried yet. You can still see it still has the band straps on it. So we'll have to process it, rip it, cross-cut it, and dry it before we can proceed to use it for body blanks or neck blanks. Here we have mahogany entering. These are neck blank sections, and you can see the way they're stacked. We call that stickering. We use small slats of wood to stack the wood so we get airflow. That way we have uniform drying between the neck blanks. We'll measure the moisture content of the wood, and the length of time it stays in the kiln is determined by the moisture content when it enters and the species of that particular wood. Here we're ripping mahogany to make various body blanks. Depending on our models, we might have a multi-piece. You know, in this case, this would be 3 pieces. Sometimes we'll have 2-piece backs, sometimes 4. It depends on the grade of the guitar and the model that we're using it on. Sometimes we'll have 1 piece as well. Here we're gluing up body blanks. So the craftsman here is applying glue to the mahogany body blanks, and he'll stack them up and put them in the clamps. He'll load the clamp up with 3 body blanks at a time, and then lock them all down, and then rotate it, and then load it up again. You can see how efficiently he applies the glue. The fixture he's using now keeps the body blank pieces from shifting when they clamp it up, and then he'll move it on to the next one. Now it'll rotate so he can load it up again. By the time he fills up this machine, he can start unloading it. The glue time is typically 30 minutes for clamp time. Here we're gluing maple tops onto the mahogany backs. In this case, these are Les Paul standard body backs. You can see it has the modern weight relieving. We apply the glue to the top, and then we have locator pins that keep the top from shifting once the glue gets on. He'll load the body blanks in the clamp press, and you can see they're stacked all on top of each other. And once it's fully loaded, then they'll apply the pressure, which in this case, this machine actually uses hydraulic pressure, which is very high pressure oil. And so we can load multiple body blanks in at one time. This was the machine I was telling you that would route the weight relieving.
Yeah.
But at this point, we're going to be machining SG bodies. Here he's inspecting the neck pocket. That way he'll be able to determine if he would have to make an adjustment to the machine to get the proper dimensions. Sometimes you have to do an offset. The next stage, then we'd flip it over and then machine out the back. This is a larger body router machine that we're using. So you can see we're doing more SGs here. This actually does the bulk of our body machining. Here we have a rotary profiler, and this machines the neck blanks in a rough shape. We have various operations that the neck blanks go through before they're finished. Here we have the neck blanks roughed in, the peg head ears glued on, and then it will go on the rotary profiler, which will rough in the neck shape and the heel. This is where we glue the truss rods into the neck. There's a slot in the neck. And as you can see, there's a truss rod installed in this neck. Now he's going to install the spline. The spline is a thin strip of maple, and that will be glued inside the neck blank. That will hold the truss rod captive so it can do its job. He just applied some tension to the truss rod. Now he'll load it up into the clamp calls. We have pneumatic clamps so he can press one valve and clamp it all together. Once that dries, then we'll surface the top surface of the neck and it will be ready for fingerboard. This is the body line. On the body line, we'll sand the bodies and get them prepared for the binding. And here you can see the binders wrapping the binding around. They apply the glue. You can see in the glue spreader there. It's a solvent-based glue, so it kind of melts the binding a little bit so we get a proper adhesion and no gaps. And you can see how the rope is then tied around the body. It's a highly skilled operation. These are bodies that have already had the binding applied, and now they're put on the racks to cure, and typically they'll stay overnight. It's a longer glue time for this particular glue because it's solvent-based, so it has to fully evaporate and dry. Here we're at the neckline, and we're processing fingerboards. So you can see the gang saw is in the center of this fixture, and the fingerboards are loaded on this turret and rotate above the saw. And that's how the fret slots are cut. They're held on by vacuum, and then they just circulate over the saw. So you can see here the vacuum fixtures that hold the fingerboard on. We also have locator holes. So with the locator holes and the vacuum, that keeps the fingerboard from shifting and makes sure it's accurate. These are the finished slotted fingerboards. Here we're fretting the fingerboards. So you can see the operator has special tools that allow them to tap the fret wire in and clip it, all with the same tool. And they're just rough tapping the frets in to get them started, and then they'll load them on that platen and insert them into that hydraulic clamp, and that'll come down and press them all in at one time. Here is where we glue the fingerboards to the neck. This machine is fully loaded, and it uses a fire hose that we fill with air for clamp pressure. That way it's perfectly uniform. The necks go through various machining operations, and this is the last actual machining operation on the NC before we go to the final hand rolling. So we'll typically go through the rotary profiler at the rough mill, and then a few other machining operations, this being the last of them. And as much machining and accuracy that we have with NC machines, after this operation, we actually have highly skilled craftsmen doing the final hand roll, which determines the final neck shape. So here the skilled operators are putting the very final shape onto the neck. It's a highly skilled operation that they've spent years developing. They have to go for the feel, and then they'll also measure it and inspect it after they get all through to make sure that it's within guidelines. We like to say that NC machines make great guitar parts, but skilled operators make great guitars. These are the neck fitters. The neck fitters will take the necks and join them to the body. And even though we have precision NC machining operations, they still have to hand fit the neck to the body, and we haven't been able to find a better way other than use a highly skilled operator for this operation. Here he's adjusting the neck, so when he assembles it to the body, he can check the correct pitch. He's chiseling it to make sure it's smooth and that it will fit. Now he's checking the pitch to ensure that it has the proper pitch off of the body. Now he's applying the glue. The key is you want to apply enough glue to hold it securely, but you don't want to apply too much because that can affect the neck body fit, and it can also just cause more mess. He'll use one clamp to glue the neck to the body. And once it's clamped, then he'll come back and he'll clean up the excess glue residue. These are guitars that have had their neck joined. They'll come here and they'll get a sanding operation to smooth the neck joint, the neck body into the neck. This is the last machining operation the guitars get before they get fine sanded and ready for finishing. At this point, the guitar is loaded on the machine, and we'll machine the pickup cavities and drill for the bridge and tailpiece holes. The reason we do this last is to ensure that we have absolute precision alignment between the neck and the bridge and the pickups. This is the plec room. The plec operation planes the frets and profiles the frets to ensure that they're leveled. So it's an automated, computer-controlled fret leveling and profiling operation. The plec machines were originally developed in Germany, and we have 8 plec machines in this room, which is more than any other company in the world. It allows us to have precision fret surfaces and consistent and accurate fret surfaces. Every guitar that we do here at USA goes through the plec process. And when you're doing the volume of instruments that we do here, all the operators can still hone and dress frets, you know, the old school way with planes and files. But when you're doing this many guitars, you know, you can't deny the accuracy that the plec allows us to do. And no matter how good you are, when you're doing numerous guitars like that throughout the day, you just can't do it that consistent and that accurate. In color prep, in this department, we'll do the final sanding of the guitars and the wood filling operations prior to the guitars going into the finishing department. On wood such as mahogany, like this SG or the back of a Les Paul or Les Paul neck, we'll apply a paste wood filler. And the paste wood filler is applied to the wood surface and then the residue wiped off, and that packs the pores with the wood filler, so that way it'll highlight the grain and it'll kind of add a staining operation, and then it will prevent the lacquer from continually soaking into the wood. We have various colors depending, you know, this would be a natural 4 mahogany, and this would be a walnut brown. We also have cherry, so we'll have different color wood fillers depending on what color the guitar will be. Guitars will typically enter on this side of the finishing department where they get base coated, which are the initial sanding sealer lacquer coats that we apply. And then they get color coats or shader coats. And then we have a QC operation that evaluates the color. Once it passes that QC operation, then it can go into the top coating. How you doing, JC and Darren? These are the QC operators. So at this point, they're checking the quality control of the finish prior to the top coat. That way, if we have to do any corrections or repairs, we don't have to worry about, you know, the time and material wasted applying the top coat. So they can do a more effective repair and get it back in line. That's another thing that's very important. Every department has its own QC station and personnel. What's unique to finishing is that we have 2 stages. Here is where we silk screen the Gibson and the Les Paul logo. Some models will have the Gibson in a silk screen in gold, and some will have the Les Paul, and then some have that Gibson in pearl and then the Les Paul model in gold. But everything is done historic with a silk screen. No decals or anything on any of our Gibson USA logos on the face of the peg head. Here we have our gold ink. So the guitar is inserted in here. We close that, apply the ink, and then clean it off. And then the logo is on the face of the guitar. This is the top coat line. We have an electrostatic finish process where this wire is connected to the truss rod, and electricity of one polarity, it makes contact with the guitar, and then the finish has an opposite polarity, so it attracts. That way we have more uniform clear coat coverage and less waste. This is the last QC line. Once the guitars are fully completed in finishing, The QC operators at this stage will then allow them, they'll inspect them and then pass them before they can dry. You're going to be in the movies. Here we have the scraping operation. This again is a very, very highly skilled operation. So she has scraper blades and a guide block. And this is another operation that we have to rely on highly skilled people to do. We've tried to automate it over the years, and we haven't found a better solution than having a skilled person come back and painstakingly scrape the binding. That is craftsmanship. The guitars go through our ovens here. So the ovens are in that room upstairs. And again, they're elevated, heat rises, so that it helps the finish cure quicker. And then once they're dried, then they're staged over here before they go into the neck prep area. So here she's cleaning the fingerboard in neck prep. So she's removed the residual lacquer off the sides, and now she's removing the lacquer off the edges of the frets. And then she'll polish it with steel wool. The buffing department will take the guitars after neck prep, and the high gloss guitars will then be sanded and buffed, which gets rid of all the orange peel in the finish and gives us the high gloss luster that we're looking for. We go through 3 different grades of buffing compound. You can see the different wheels. We have the red compound, which is the most coarse, and then we go to a yellow, which is the middle grade, and then we go to white, which is the finest. So by successively going through the different grades of buffing compound, that's what gives us the high gloss luster to our finish. Our electronics department is responsible for all our Gibson pickups. We make the Gibson pickups for all of the divisions right here in this room. So we'll supply the pickups for the Gibson USA, our division, as well as custom in Memphis and our gear and accessory division. Here we have our coil winders. We'll use various grades and gauges of magnet wire on our coils. Here the orange lighter colored wire is what's called a polyurethane coating, and it's a thinner build and can withstand higher temperatures. Our historic pickups use plain enamel, which is the darker brown that you see on the side. And that's what we used back in the old days, and on our historic pickups we'll still use the plain enamel. It's a slightly thicker build on the insulation, and that imparts a particular tone and effect on the pickup coils. So depending on what we're doing, we'll use the appropriate wire. And then we have various gauges from 40 to 45 that we'll use. You know, 42 gauge is what we use on a lot of our historic pickups, like our classic humbucking and P90 pickups. And then some of our modern pickups, we might use 43 gauge or 44 or 45. The finer the gauge, the higher the resistance, and the thinner the wire, you can put more wire on. So you can make a hotter pickup by using a finer gauge wire and putting more turns on. Once the pickup coils are wound, you can see how fine the wire is. It's like hair. It's very, very delicate. So we'll attach the lead wires, which are these small wires here, and we'll attach those to the end of the coil and then tape them. So when it's done, that would be a coil that has the lead wire attached. Once we have all this operation done, the next operation then, they would go to the base plate operation. Here we have the wires installed. Then the coils will be installed with all the various pieces like the pole shoe and the spacers. Then the pickups are submerged in the wax. The wax bath solidifies the coil winder and then fills any voids in the coil and pickup assembly to keep it from vibrating, as well as just protecting the coil. Typically 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the pickup. The key is that all the bubbles release out of the coil and the pickup assembly and are displaced by wax. Now we're entering final assembly. So this will be the, as the name implies, the final assembly of the guitar, the end of the line more or less. As the guitars are picked to be built, we'll have the parts kits here. So our parts department will pull all the components for each particular guitar, and then they'll be assigned to the line to get built up, and then each guitar is given a parts kit. And then the operators at each stage install the tuners, and then install the pickups and electronics, the bridges, all the components that make up the guitar. Some electronic assemblies are hand wired, which would be like this that we would use in the Les Paul traditional. So it's historic, like we've used for many years. Some of our control assemblies are quick connect. So we use a quick connect system to connect our pickups, the jack, and our pickup selector switch and ground wire. And they both have their benefits. A lot of people who like the traditional hand wired, like that. But we use a quick connect because it's very reliable and it's very suited to production, and it's very consistent. You don't have, it's a lot more consistent in terms of reliability and consistency. In the cells here, we just rearranged this so we have the final tuners and testers and adjusters, the final cleaners, and the final inspectors all in all these cells here. And then, like Jack here, Jack is one of the final inspectors. Jack has over 20 years of experience here at Gibson USA, as do all the rest of the final inspectors. They've done all the various operations throughout the plant required to make a guitar, so they're greatly qualified to be the final inspector. They inspect all the guitars for not only cosmetics, but playability and function. And features, to ensure that we have the proper hardware installed, that the electronics perform as intended, and that the guitar's play is expected, and then to make sure that the finish is proper and that there's no cosmetic issues. And they have the power to reject a guitar, and if it doesn't pass them, then we'll have to rework it or repair it. And then lastly, once the guitars are approved by the final inspectors, after the final inspectors give them the final approval, then they can go into the distribution center, our warehouse here, and then get packed up. And this is the end of the line. The guys here take the guitars and they pack them depending on the model. Some will go in gig bags, some will go in cases. If they're guitars that are shipping immediately, they'll get boxed up and then shipped out daily. Some of them are staged in the warehouse, and then some guitars are put in gig bags and then staged in the warehouse. So it depends on the order requirements. Along with packing them in the case, they'll put any accessories that go along with the guitars and then give it their final signature.
Is pleased to induct Les Paul.
I'd like to tell you how happy I am to be here tonight on Earth. Seriously, of all my dreams, this is the last dream I never thought would happen. I happen to be a hard-working person that loves action and loves to be with other people and play and invent
Yeah.
and create.